Good afternoon. Welcome to part 3 of our legal research series, Local, State, and Federal Codes. Our presenter today is Eve Ross. She is a reference librarian at the University of South Carolina Law Library. And before we begin, I just want to talk about some of our webinar norms and technical aspects. We ask that all participants mute their mics. We ask that all attendees turn off their video camera in order to save on bandwidth. If you have any questions or technical problems, please ask using the chat box. You can make the screen of the PowerPoint bigger. Just click on Hide Everyone. You can also zoom in or out of the PowerPoint screen. You can also take screenshots of the PowerPoint. After the webinar, a link to the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be sent out to the registered participants.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome to Legal Research Webinar Series, Part 3, Researching Local, State, and Federal Codes. My name is Eve Ross, and I will be presenting today. Glad to have you with us. You can learn today how to help your patrons with legal research. This webinar will start by answering, what is a code? And then we'll move to our first example of local codes of ordinances. After that, we'll talk a little bit about what state and federal codes of law have in common, and we'll talk specifically about the South Carolina Code, followed by the United States Code. First question is, what is a code? You can see a picture here of Hammurabi's Code, one of the ancient codes of law. Any code is a compilation of all the laws that were in effect at one time in one jurisdiction. That's what a code still is today. How is a code organized? By subject, which makes a lot of sense to us as librarians. And then as you delve into each subject, you will see an outline format appear. So for example, this is the United States Code. The top levels are titles, and you can see how each title covers a different subject of law. And if we open up Title 17, we can see how we get more and more specific within copyright. The number of levels within each subject area can depend on what the code is and how in-depth it gets. But even when a code is in print and when it has page numbers, no one uses those. We always cite to a place in the outline, whether that's a broad title or a slightly more specific chapter or a very specific section. The way that it's organized will depend. Normally, in most types of codes, there's going to be a definition section towards the beginning. And then towards the end, there's going to be exceptions and penalties. Now, whether that's the end of the chapter or the end of the title, that's going to depend a little bit. But we always know that it's important to read from context, and the common pitfall that a lot of our researchers will fall into is that they do a keyword search, they find one section that looks like it answers their question, and they consider that they're done. And so this is one of the things that librarians can do, and you wouldn't be practicing law if you did this, to encourage everyone, just as a matter of best practices, to look at that table of contents and to browse and to just get some context, because these definitions are not the Merriam-Webster definition. They're not necessarily the legal dictionary definition. It's going to be a specific definition that applies in the context of this code chapter or section and so on. Laws amend the code. We all are familiar with how a bill becomes a law, but in that cartoon, they never talk about how the law becomes part of the code. And if you want to understand what a bill would do if it became law, it may help to look up the code sections that are referenced in that bill and get some context. So, for example, if we look at the code where it deals with copyright, imagine that a law might say, instead of definitions, let's change that language. Let's call it defined terms instead. That would be an amendment. That's one thing a law can do. A law can also insert new language into the code. A law can delete language out of the code. Now, laws can do more things than just that, but very, very often, most types of laws are doing one of those three things, all of those three things. They can do numerous things to change the code. And that process of amending, inserting, and deleting provisions of the code is called codifying the law. So some laws that have just been recently passed, they take effect, but they haven't been codified yet because the code hasn't been updated to show those changes. Let's go to our first example with local codes of ordinances. Does your town or your city or your county have a code? Yes. Almost certainly it does. If your town council, your city council, your county council passes ordinances, which surely they do that, ordinances are local laws, then they should be compiling them into a code of ordinances. The reality sometimes is that smaller towns and smaller cities can sometimes struggle to get that work done because it's very technical work that needs to happen to put those changes into the code. And many times for local ordinances, a town, a city, or a county is going to contract with a legal publisher to actually do that work for them. And the two big ones are municipal code and American legal. So those companies will organize all the ordinances into a code so that it's a snapshot of everything that's in effect as of that date. And they'll put that on a website where the public can browse and search. And then every so often, as new ordinances are passed, they'll put a whole batch of those new ordinances into the code to update the code. So you can find the South Carolina cities and counties that have contracted with municipal code at the link that I'm providing here, library.municode.com/SC. And this is just a short subset of that list that I've included on the slide. It's a longer list on the website. And American Legal has different cities and counties. So if you're lucky, both your city and your county will use the same one of these, and you can just look in one place to find both. But notice how Columbia uses municipal code and Richland County uses American legal. So that means people in Columbia who want to find both their city and their county are going to have to look in two different places. Look at how to find local ordinances from the easiest way to the hardest way. Obviously, if you can use Municode or American legal, that would be the easiest because they compile the codes from multiple cities and counties. And so if you get familiar with their format, it doesn't matter which one you look up, it's going to be similar. But if it's not there, if what you're looking for is an ordinance that is not on Municode or American legal, you're going to have to check the website of that city, town, or county. And if they don't have it on their website yet, you're going to need to email the clerk of the council. In some cases, they aren't able to put their ordinances on their website and they're not able to contract with these legal publishers. And so they'll just have the ordinances at the clerk's office and the patron would have to go there in person. So here's an example, and I hope that those who have arrived will take a moment to answer it in the chat, and Megan will let me know briefly what you say. Imagine that you're a librarian in the town of Lexington, South Carolina, and a patron comes in and says, okay, legally, what kind of tags does my dog actually have to have? Notice that that is a legal question, and you can't answer it with legal advice. So take a moment and tell me in the chat how you would answer it.
One person responded with, you may want to contact your local county licensing office. Here's the number.
That's good. One thing you could say is, let me show you how to access local ordinances on Municode. I've had a situation similar to this where they wanted to challenge what the office had told them. In order to do that, they wanted to see the local ordinances. So if you know where those are located, you can let the patron do that research themselves. This is kind of what it looks like on Municode. If you go to Lexington, South Carolina, in that list, and you drill down within the code, whether you're browsing or you can also search there, there is a section that talks about a rabies tag. And that common pitfall that I just mentioned, notice there's no cross-references to anything else that you might need to know. And so when the patron does that research, they may think, okay, I've got the answer. But if you look in Lexington County, which if they're in the town, then they're also in the county, then there's also an ID tag. So that's just something where you can mention both city and county, and that's not practicing law to just explain how to navigate city and county resources. And here's what it looked like in April when I put these slides together. Notice that the first date you see, it says the online content was updated as of February 27th, but if you look a little further down, it says something about it's only updated through November 4th, which can be confusing. Making sure the code that you're looking at is updated can be a challenge. What you're looking at in this code, the one that if you use the search box at the top or if you use the titles on the left to browse, the one that you're actually searching online only reflects the ordinances that the town council passed up through November 4th. And there was that delay while they got a batch of ordinances together and added them into the code to codify them. They got that work done by February 27th. So when you search, you're searching something that's a little bit out of date there. Those changes were made on February 27th, but there were laws passed after that. These ordinances, these local laws, were adopted by the municipality but not reflected in the code yet. So those, after ordinance number 2019-48, all the way up through April when I looked at this, those adopted ordinances that were not yet codified are just listed separately here. So what that patron would need to do after they found the town's ordinance on the previous slide, after they found the county's ordinance on the previous slide, they would need to come back to this first page and just sort of scan through these later adopted ordinances and make sure there's nothing in there about dog tags, because there could be a recent change that was not yet included in the code. And they would need to check the Town of Lexington website and the County of Lexington website for any ordinances that were adopted after the date that they were sent to MuniCode. So hopefully that's a very short time, but sometimes it can be a longer time with more to look through. Any questions about local codes of ordinances before we go on to state and federal? Okay, state and federal codes of law. First, I'm going to talk about some aspects that are common to both state and federal laws. The most expensive way is Westlaw or Nexus Uni. These are subscription databases, and they're published by the same publishers that also publish in print, so that you can get a print version. And there are also government publishers sometimes that publish in print. For example, the United States Code is published in print by the government. But the free aspect is a government website, or there's the Cornell Legal Information Institute, and there's also FindLaw and Justia, and there's probably some others who are freely accessible on the web. Legislatures enact statutes, just like those town councils and county councils enact ordinances. So all of these codes that we're talking about today are statutory codes. And just like MuniCode and American Legal contract with some towns and cities to organize their codes, Westlaw and Nexus Uni, or technically their parent companies, contract with some states to organize and update their statutory codes. The parent company of Westlaw has the contract with South Carolina, and so the print version of the South Carolina Code, the official version, is published by West. The text of the law is going to be exactly the same in all these sources. Now, it might be updated as of a different date, but if you get the same date across each of these sources, the text of the law should be exactly the same. So why would you pay more? Databases tend to be more frequently updated. There are only some government sources that are updating frequently. Other government sources are based on print, and so they're waiting until all of those changes can be made in a big batch in print, which leaves you with a very out-of-date code. Both in print and in the databases, as long as the publisher is Westlaw or LexisNexis, there's going to be annotations. And we'll go into the benefits of an annotated code, but that is one of the major things that you are paying for, is the benefit of those annotations. When you're using a print code that is published by West or Nexus Uni, or you're using their subscription database, those annotations include cross-references to other relevant sections within the code. So if you remember our example from the town of Lexington, it wasn't cross-referencing you to the county. A state law may reference a federal law may reference a state law, or there may be other codes. For example, codes of regulations that are going to be talked about in part 4 of this webinar series. If you want to get the cross-reference to those, you're going to need an annotated code. It simply won't be there in the unannotated version. Also, the annotations include references to specific chapters and sections in legal encyclopedias, legal treatises, law journals, and forms books. If you were in part 2 of this series, then you know the value of those secondary sources. And to have this roadmap telling you exactly which chapter and exactly which section relates to the code section that you just found and explains it is incredibly valuable. And annotations include short summaries of cases in which courts have interpreted that code section. And it'll give you the citation to that case so that you can quickly look up the case itself and read the whole thing. That is so valuable that most people, when they talk about annotations, they're primarily referring to these case law annotations. When you read the code, your understanding of it may not match a judge's understanding of it, and understanding how the judge is going to view it is crucial. So here's another question that I hope you'll answer in the chat. What happens when your patron comes in and says, oh, do I need to look at a state code, or how about a federal code? I don't know if my situation involves state law or federal law or both. Notice that that's an ask for legal advice, and you can't give them legal advice. What would you say?
Here's one that came through. You must contact an attorney to know what applies in your situation. And here's another one that came through. I can show you how to access this information through Westlaw, or how to utilize our statute books here in the library. Which would you prefer to utilize?
Yes, those are both great answers. Thank you so much. Here's the way that I would answer it. I would say we have the state code and the federal code, so you can check both if you decide you need to. And let me show you some secondary sources that may help you decide where to start. If you want to determine what type of law applies, my best advice to you is to consult a secondary source, because it may tell you that answer in a very straightforward way. So for example, a legal encyclopedia may say, this is an issue of state law, or this is an issue of federal law, and that'll tell you immediately and help you narrow it down. Also, Westlaw and Nexus Uni will let you do a very broad search. Their sort of Google-like unified search will include federal and state for sure. They're not as certain to include local. Sometimes they do, but being able to search as much as possible at once is helpful. And remember that more than one type of law may apply. It's always safer to say, go ahead and check both and just see. Another question for y'all. This list of family law, landlord-tenant law, wills, trusts, and estates. Out of the 9 responses that we got from before these legal research webinars, this is what librarians said were their most frequently asked types of legal questions. And it actually matches up with another survey that we did earlier that had more responses. Are these state or federal? What are your thoughts?
One response was state and federal depending on the situation.
Right. These are primarily state law questions, but you're absolutely right that federal law could apply in specific situations, and actually even local ordinances could be relevant in specific situations. It's always good practice to look at all, but primarily state law is probably going to be where you want to start with all of those questions. And that brings us to the South Carolina Code. How is the South Carolina Code organized? Like any code, it is organized by subject. So here's my example of Title 60, Libraries, Archives, Museums, and Arts. It's in an outline form where the main headings are titles. So like this, generally about libraries. The subheadings are chapters. And notice how the numbering of the chapters does not look quite right. That's really how they're numbered, and I didn't just abbreviate it for this slide. It's not unusual for numbers to be skipped, or for it to have something like chapter 5 and have it be marked reserved in brackets with no further text. And that's what it will look like when a code section has been deleted by law or repealed. The lowest level of the outline is sections, and the actual text of the law is inside of the section. So if you want to recognize references to the South Carolina Code, this is not necessarily the perfect citation, but it is a typical citation that you would usually see. This symbol that looks like 2 S's, one on top of the other, is the abbreviation for section. If you already know which title and chapter you're in, you may simply refer to it as section 30, or you may need to be specific and call it section 60-9-30 to include the title, the chapter, and the section. Also, when you're Googling to recognize a reference to the South Carolina Code, this is one example of what that would look like in Google results. You're looking for scstatehouse.gov as the website, and you're looking for something like a title or a chapter. Each chapter of the South Carolina Code has its own webpage that is Googleable, and so those can be very reliable links. So if we click that link, it's going to take us to the page in the South Carolina Code that's Title 44, Chapter 77. And you may have to scroll a long way down because the whole chapter is going to be there to get to the section that you want. And notice that every now and then you will actually be able to find a form. That's something that a lot of patrons are looking for, is they want a form that they can fill in. There are a few in the South Carolina Code, for example, this living will form. Updating the South Carolina Code. That process of codifying the new laws, adding, deleting, and changing according to what the laws say, happens once a year. So in print, you see these older volumes that are hardbound where it actually says they were revised in 2009 and 2010, and you're thinking, wait, once a year? What's going on here? It's actually the supplements that are changed once a year. They include all of the changes since the last hardbound volume was published. They don't want to incur the cost of revising the whole hardbound volume and having to ship a whole new set of hardbound volumes every year. So the hardbound volume is revised in various years. Once that paperback supplement gets too thick and unwieldy, then they revise the hardbound volume and send a new copy of that. All of your supplements, though, on the shelf should be from the most recent year. So this one is out of date. It says 2017. It should be 2019. And your process when you're looking things up in print is you have to look up every code section twice. The first place you look it up is in that hardbound volume, and that gives you the version that was updated as of the date on the spine. And then you have to look it up all over again in the supplement to see what changed afterward up through the supplement date. So let's say that you look up a code section and you find it in the volume on the left here that was revised in 2009. You do find it in that hardbound volume. And then you look it up again in the supplement and you don't see it there. That does not mean that it was repealed. That means it didn't change. If it was repealed, it would say repealed in the supplement. So let's imagine that you don't see in the hardbound volume the section that you're looking for, but you do see it in the supplement. That means it's a relatively new law that was passed sometime between 2009, so it couldn't be included in the hardbound, sometime between 2009 and 2017 there, or 2019 if your supplement is updated, that it was passed. So a question for y'all. When you get a set of 2020 supplements to update your set in print, should you keep those 2019 supplements just in case? What do you think?
One person responded no.
That is correct. The 2020 supplements are going to contain all the changes since each of those hardbound volumes was published. Here's the link to the free government website where you can access the South Carolina Code. Remember that a code is a compilation of all laws that were in effect at one time. So what it does is it includes all of those changes from the paperback supplement. They are all together in the code online. However, it's only as updated as that paperback supplement is. So that's a big caveat that when you're looking online, it's not updated with the most recent laws. This link is, again, a free government website provided by the state of South Carolina. The list of acts will show you the laws that have been passed that are not yet codified. So they are keeping this list up to date, and you can set the year to whichever year you need it to be. And these will be all of the acts that have passed the legislature in the 2020 session. So just like we mentioned, the ordinances that were not yet codified in the Lexington Town Code is the same process here, where you would need to scan through and say, okay, I was looking for a form of living will, and now I need to scan through all of these. It's not daylight savings, it's not bicycles. If you see anything about living wills, then you're going to need to pull up that act and see how it would be changing the code. Any questions about South Carolina before we go on to United States Code?
Is the paperback supplement valuable as part of an archived collection?
At the University of South Carolina Law Library, we do keep those paperback supplements so that we can take those snapshots year after year. But that's kind of something that we do as a law library, and I don't think other types of libraries would need to do it because The archived versions of the code are also on the South Carolina State House website. So if you do have a patron who needs to know what the law was in 2017, so they want to look through that old version of the code, that is easily done on scstatehouse.gov. The ones that would be really valuable would be if you had a complete collection like back from the 70s or so, because they're not online that far back, but anything today on is going to be online, no problem. Any other questions about South Carolina before we go on? Okay, United States Code. Notice that the citation to the United States Code looks just a little bit different than it does to the South Carolina Code. The title comes first. So the number of which title it's in is going to come before the abbreviation of the United States Code. You'll still see that same abbreviation of section and then the section. So notice how in South Carolina we had 3 numbers, title-chapter-section. In the United States Code, it's just the title and the section. So how is the United States Code organized? I'm going to use this citation as an example, and I'm going to use the govinfo.gov version of the United States Code, but at the end I will show you a different version that's also a free government website. Govinfo.gov is official. In this official version of the code, once you find a section, you can download it as a PDF. So that what you are seeing is the official version exactly as it is in the official print version that's published by the government. And so this is what you would be seeing at the top of the page. Title 42 is the top level. Section 1382C is the bottom level. But will there be chapters? Will there be subchapters? Will there be parts? How many levels are going to be in between the title and the section? That varies depending on how complex that area of law is in the statutes. So notice we've got a chapter, a subchapter, and a part here. It could be done in a variety of ways. So don't be surprised if there's a lot to dig through or a very little bit. If we dig into that part, notice how the common pitfall is to look for 1382 and say, okay, I found section 1382, and then you're looking for C inside that as a subsection. It's very common in the United States Code to have letters be part of those section numbers. So this citation should be leading you to section 1382C, which is a totally separate section from section 1382. Each of these parts, sections, chapters, titles, etc. will let you download a PDF or text or something called details or share. Now that PDF is what I just mentioned, that it's government authenticated and looks exactly like the official print. But of course, the more that's in it, the slower it is to load. The text will be quicker to load, but even then, it can be an overwhelming amount of information because some of these parts and sections are just huge. The details link is a really helpful link where it includes on that page the options for PDF and text as well as zip, and it lists which bills became law to create that section initially and to amend it. So if it's been amended numerous times over the years and you want to get an understanding of what each of those amendments did, the details page will lead you to all of that. And then to share, that gives you the link to the details page. And so that's the one that you're going to want to focus on if the patron wants to, for example, email it to themselves. So notice how my citation changed again just now. You'll see some very specific citations to the United States Code sometimes. This one includes the subsections. How many subsections there are, that varies. But notice how when you're looking in print, if it's the PDF or if it's the text, either way, it's really hard to locate those subsections within the section sometimes because it's just not indented the way that you would expect an outline to be indented sometimes. How many levels of subsections? You don't know. It's unpredictable. And so if you're just glancing down the page, you may not notice, for example, if you're looking at 2A right there, you may not realize that that should be F2A. That number 2 is coming after the number 1 that was above it. For F1, this is F2A. And so if you're looking for F2B, all it's got in front of it is a B on that paragraph. So you need to kind of mentally put that F2 in front of it. And again, I'm showing you the PDF version, but in the text version, it's just as confusing. The United States Code is officially updated once a year. That's the version that I've been showing you on govinfo.gov. That's the PDF version. Notice how it's updated once a year, but we're 2 years late already because it's 2020 and their latest is 2018. And they do have those archived versions available. So if you need that snapshot of what was in effect in a previous year, you can find that online as well. Now, the other version that again is a free government website is on uscode.house.gov. This one is current up through the most recent laws that Congress has passed. But it's not official. It doesn't give you the PDF, but it's also extremely useful with searching by keyword search, searching by citation, if you know the title and the section, and you can also browse. Everything I just showed you was unannotated. The benefits of an annotated version of the United States Code are huge. Notice that the official South Carolina Code in print actually is annotated, but the official United States Code is not. You're going to have to get Westlaw or Nexus Uni if you want the annotated version of the United States Code, and that's either print or online. And you'll notice that the abbreviation is different. Westlaw's version is USCA for United States Code Annotated, and Nexus Uni's version is USCS for United States Code Service. The text of the law is the same no matter which one of these you're using, the unannotated USC, annotated USCA, or annotated USCS. The actual text of the law is the same in all of them. Nobody's changing that. It's still a primary source. But USCA and USCS are more frequently updated. So just like that US Code Online that you saw on the house.gov website, they are updated up through 2020 compared to the 2018 version that is the official version. And both Westlaw and Nexus Uni provide annotations, and that's cross-references to other code sections, references to secondary sources, as well as short summaries of cases that interpret those code sections. And especially with the federal code, those annotations can be numerous and crucial to understanding the content of the code. I've come to the end of the presentation portion of the webinar, and I just want to quickly give you a few other references. We have a basic legal research training LibGuide on our website called Circuit Riders that contains this information as well as all the information that is being presented in this webinar series. The next ones are researching state and federal regulations and researching state and federal cases, court rules, and forms. You've got our email address here and our social media. And now, if you would like me to demonstrate, there's our Circuit Riders guide. So you can see state, local, and federal, where all of that fits in, as well as all of the other topics that are covered there. I've got municipal code, I've got American legal, I have the South Carolina code, the list of acts, federal GovInfo version of United States Code, the House version. I also added the public laws. These are if you're looking at an outdated version and you need to update with the latest laws that are not codified. That's on congress.gov. I also have Westlaw up. I'll continue researching. If you would like to see an annotated code. And thanks to Thomas Cooper Library, they are the ones who are paying for Nexus Uni. And y'all tell me in the chat, Megan will let me know what it is that you're interested in seeing an example or a demo of. I'll just show you on Westlaw the value of those annotations using the same example that I had before. If I want to type in the citation to 42 USC 1382C, notice that it has a red flag. This is one of the huge benefits of Westlaw. If a statute has been questioned or challenged or overturned, that flag is going to pop up here. That's not something that you would see on any other website other than Westlaw, or Nexus Uni also has a version of that. It says that this section of the code is unconstitutional or preempted, and it was held unconstitutional by this case, which was decided on April 10th. So that's something that you would want to look at and find out, does that really change things? This is a First Circuit case that came out of Puerto Rico. But the First Circuit is a court of appeals, so I would definitely want to look into that a little further and find out if there's an ongoing challenge to this section and to whether it's valid. So we can see the text of the law here. We can also go to find more case law summaries. These have been chosen by the editors of Westlaw, so if you're interested in what factors determine disability, what does substantial gainful activity mean, what are the elements to prove things, if there's a particular impairment maybe that the patron has and they want to understand how they can provide evidence, you can go directly to a short summary and find the case there. You can see the history of how this code section came to be. These citing references, rather than being selected narrowly by editors, citing references are broadly found through sort of an AI process, and everything that references this section, all 30,000 cases that reference it are here, and then you can filter down. Other statutes that reference it, regulations, as are going to be talked about in part 4, and every secondary source that references it is included here. Context and analysis are chosen by editors. So for a basic legal researcher, I would look first at the encyclopedias in context and analysis, because these are going to be the most straightforward explanations of the law. Many patrons are looking for forms. So to be able to find a form of how to write a brief to go before an appeals council when claiming disability, like all of these forms could be really, really helpful depending on their situation. Now, I would never want to tell someone which form to use because that would be practicing law, but just showing them where forms are available could be really helpful. And on Nexus Uni, you can just type in your citation to the code and it should go straight there. I find it a little harder to navigate on Nexus Uni because they are sort of limiting your view. You don't really see United States code and where to click on it. But luckily, if you have a citation, it's not hard. And notice how just like Westlaw had the red flag, this Shepherd service gives you a yellow exclamation saying there's pending legislation that you need to be aware of. So apparently this hasn't passed. It was introduced in the House in February, but what I might want to do is say, I want to find this on congress.gov, just search for what is that 2020 HR 5970, what would that do? And look at that bill, the text of the bill. It says, okay, it would have something to do with taking into account as an adverse factor any linguistic limitation that an individual may have, including lack of facility with the English language. So that bill hasn't passed, but it has been introduced, and if it makes its way through Congress and eventually becomes law, then it's going to alter Section 423 as well as, oh yeah, there's our section 1382C. That's where it would actually change a definition in that definition section. So I'm going to check back in with Megan. How are we doing? Any other questions?
Nothing has come through the chat.
Well, I'm going to wait another few seconds, and if nothing else comes through the chat, then I guess we will be done.
There was a couple of thank yous and that this was very informative.
Well, thank you for attending.
And just to let you guys know, the next part of our legal research series will be held in 2 weeks on May 28th, and it'll be on researching state and federal regulations presented by Rebecca Maxwell. If you have any feedback to give us about the webinar series, or if you would like to propose a webinar, please go to one of the links on the screen. And thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you, Megan.